Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." Here's a story from Tyler Stanton's book, Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools. So we get to step 2, CJ announced, which turns out to be all about believing in and depending on a power greater than yourself. CJ owed his few months of sobriety mostly to his AA group that he had joined. He was recounting to me, this would be Tyler, a recent conversation with Owen, his sponsor. If you're not familiar with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it has a lot of God language in it. Most 12-step groups, for the sake of inclusivity, have adopted the language of a higher power. "Hey man, what's the deal?" CJ explained to Owen. "I want to get sober. I'm committed to the program, but I'm out on God. Don't misunderstand me. I'm in for everything else, but please don't try to talk me into some kind of cosmic therapist to help me say no thanks to gin and tonic." That's a fair summary of how many people feel about prayer. There's been an Eastern spiritual renaissance in the modern West of late, particularly in urban areas, among the educated class of emerging generations. Practices like Buddhist mindfulness, meditative emptying, yoga, even yoga accompanying with chants in an unknown language to an unknown God, anything that gets anyone to some elusive, centered state are on the table. So yeah, I'll pray. Many subconsciously think if by prayer we're talking about some kind of meditation, something that's happening in me. I can get on board with that. But actual communication with a divine being intelligent enough to have created me and everything that I know and experience, come on. That seems absurd. If such a being exists, the idea that he would be at my beck and call for conversation seems ridiculous. And that's how a lot of people feel about prayer, and that's how CJ felt. And so a couple days later, Owen calls up CJ just as the workday is drawing to a close and says, "I'm in front of your place with my car. Come on out and get in the car." "Where are we going?" CJ asked. "Just get in." They drive deep into Brooklyn, the car finally backing into a vacant spot with an expired meter along the Coney Island boardwalk. The two of them walk onto the beach together on a brisk November day. They sit down on the sand next to each other and just look, watching the sun set over the horizon. The gray-blue water extending far beyond what they can see. And the cold wind whips against their faces and cuts against their jackets as they just look, neither of them speaking for a minute or two. Eventually, Owen breaks the silence with a question. "See anything here more powerful than you are?" CJ hesitates and then says slowly, "Yeah." "Great," Owen says. "Start there." Owen drove CJ where he wasn't going on his own to show him what he wasn't seeing for himself. See anything more powerful than you? In other words, can you see yourself, your tiny self, in the midst of a vast expanse beyond you? Can you see yourself from God's perspective for just a moment? Owen was introducing CJ to stillness and wonder from which all prayer emerges. Prayer doesn't begin with us, it begins with God. It doesn't start with speaking, it starts with seeing. As Philip Yancey writes, prayer is the act of seeing reality from God's point of view. Before we open our lips and say a single word to God, we have to discover that prayer posture. But we'll need the right sponsor, a mentor in prayer, who will take us where we weren't planning to go to show us what we aren't currently seeing. And for that, we turn to David, who has more prayers recorded in the Bible than anyone else by a long shot. Psalm 46 is attributed to the sons of Korah, which is shorthand title for a crew of worshipers that David had gathered for night and day prayer at the tabernacle. And from that community come these famous words from Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." Prayer starts here. Today's message is adapted from Tyler Stanton's book, Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools. Number one, be still. We begin with just these two words of poetic prayer by the sons of Korah, be still. It sounds simple enough, right? It's actually much more complicated and difficult than it sounds, because the way of life that you and I have grown accustomed to as normal is actually historically abnormal, and it makes stillness nearly impossible. The historically abnormal but universally accepted Western lifestyle is largely the result of three groundbreaking inventions: the clock, the light bulb, and the iPhone. The clock. In 1370, the first public clock was set up in Germany. Historians popularly point to that moment as a turning point when the world shifted from natural time to artificial time. Previously, people awoke with the sun's rising and went to bed with its setting. There was a rhythm to life, with longer days in the summer and shorter days in the winter, which I assume is how most people made it through German winters. Before central heating, they mostly slept through it. As of 1370, when people started managing their time artificially, time shifted from being a limit governing our lives to now a resource used according to our own individual agendas. Then there was the light bulb. In 1879, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, which, among other things, cut way back on our sleep time. Prior to the light bulb, the average American slept 10 hours a night. And with the increased potential for human productivity, technology took off. By the 1960s, central air conditioning and heating, microwaves and dishwashers and laundry machines were common in American households. Around that time, sociologists commonly started making predictions about what human life would look like by the time that you and I are now living in. And pretty much everyone was on the same page: a dramatic increase in leisure and ease of life. A Senate subcommittee in 1967 jointly predicted that by 1985, the average American would work 22 hours a week for 27 weeks a year, because of all the leisure time that this new technology would free up. In reality, the average time people spend on leisure has decreased since the 1980s. Technology has continued to advance and save us time. They got that part right, but what they misjudged was how we'd use that time. We've spent that time on other things other than deep rest. And then there is the iPhone. How have we used that time? Well, when Apple released the first iPhone in June of 2007, they gave us a tracking device for that very kind of data. In 2016, a study found that the average iPhone user touches their phone 2,617 times a day, staring at their phone screen for 2.5 hours over 76 sessions. A more recent 2019 study discovered that in just 3 years, that figure had more than doubled to over 5 hours a day. Instead of slowing down and harnessing technology to free up leisure time, we now suffer from what mental health professionals call hurry sickness, a behavioral pattern characterized by continual rushing and anxiety. In a society that prizes efficiency and productivity above all else, that uses time like a tool rather than a limit, hurry isn't an occasional necessity, it's the new normal. Be still. It's not as simple as it sounds. The Christian philosopher Dallas Willard was once asked, "What do I need to do to be spiritually healthy?" And after a long pause, he offered this now famous response: "You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life." According to Willard, hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life in our day. That's interesting, isn't it? I find that interesting because if I were to ask a number of spiritual teachers, pastors, priests, theologians, what's the great spiritual enemy of our day, I doubt that very many of them would instinctively respond with hurry. Michael Zigarelli of Messiah University did a 5-year study of 20,000 Christians in the United States and identified busyness as the number one distraction from life with God. He summarizes his own research with this great conclusion. It may be the case that, 1, Christians are assimilating to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, which leads to, 2, God becoming more marginalized in Christians' lives, which leads to, 3, a deteriorating relationship with God, which leads to, 4, Christians becoming even more vulnerable to adopting secular assumptions about how to live, which leads to, 5, becoming more increasing conformity to this culture of busyness, hurry, and overload. And then the cycle begins again. Does that sound familiar to you? It does to me. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose research is the basis of the Myers-Briggs personality test, put it bluntly: hurry is not of the devil, it is the devil. The modern day sage Richard Foster writes, in contemporary society, our adversary, a biblical title for the devil, majors in 3 things, he says: noise, hurry, and crowds. If he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied. Muchness and manyness. A journalist once asked theologian Thomas Merton to diagnose the leading spiritual disease of our time, and Merton gave a one-word answer: efficiency. We tend to attribute the complexity and busyness of our lives to a false culprit. We blame it on our environment. The pace of activity in our cities, our workload, our office culture, our stage in life, the current demands on our time, are all assumed to be the chief causes of our overwhelmed lives. Quaker missionary Thomas Kelly, writing in 1941, made a different observation after spending a full year slowing down and simplifying on a 12-month sabbatical. And his happened to be in Hawaii, which sounds pretty nice, like a nice place to go. But like other Americans, he had carried with him to the tropics this madcap, feverish life that he knew on the mainland. Your inner life is not a mirror image of your environment. If anything, the opposite is true. We create an environment that mirrors our inner life. Kelly observes, strained by the very mad pace of our daily outer burdens, we are further strained by an inward uneasiness, because we have hints that there is a way of life that is vastly richer and deeper than all of this hurried existence. A life where there is unhurried serenity and peace and power. If only we could slip over into that center. If only we could find the silence which is the source of sound. All of these teachers are circling around the same thing. Hurry is a great enemy in the spiritual life of our day. I'm sure the sons of Korah want all of us to be mentally and emotionally healthy, but what's at stake isn't only our ability to stay centered in life. When this psalm urges us to be still, it's not pushing us towards a self-care retreat. It's undermining an ancient conspiracy. All the way back at the beginning of the story, Adam and Eve took and ate the forbidden fruit from that one forbidden tree. They sinned, and as the result, they hid, they made clothes, they argued, they blamed each other. They dealt with their sin through what Richard Foster calls muchness and manyness, what Michael Zigarelli names busyness, and what Dallas Willard diagnoses as hurry. And ever since then, we've always found it easiest to ignore the truth as long as we never stop moving. In the fall of humanity, we mastered the art of hurry. And so we end up as good people, but as people who are not very deep. We are very shallow. We are not bad. We're just busy. We're not immoral, we're just distracted. We're not lacking in soul, we are just preoccupied. We're not disdaining depth, we just never do things that get us there, said Ronald Rolheiser. We try to import prayer then and kind of add it on to our hurried lives, treating the symptoms but avoiding the full detox. And the result is usually a kind of lip service to God while we are effortlessly conforming ourselves to the culture. And that remains the true God that we are worshiping. We can keep up the illusion that we are, connected to God, but also we're, part of our culture. We can ignore the truth as long as we never stop moving. We think about how important we are, how many demands we have to fulfill at work and at home, how many people depend on us. We have a Facebook account to keep up with, a Netflix queue to watch. But let the sons of Korah remind us to practice the prayer posture of stillness. As surely as David, the king of a nation in a world of tribal warfare, did. I tend to go to bed worrying about deadlines and bills and to-do lists. David hit the pillow worried about an enemy that was encamped in the hill country, and he was waiting for the right moment to charge. And yet, in spite of all of his responsibilities, he prioritized time for stillness. He had a habit of stillness that allowed him to see his own life from God's perspective. Be still. The Latin term is vacate, from which we get the English word vacation. The invitation of prayer anytime, anywhere is this: take a vacation. Stop playing God over your own life for a moment. Release control. Return to the created order. Be still. Prayer begins there, but it's only the beginning. Number 2, know God and know yourself. This last year, April 8th, 2024, you hopefully got to experience a near total eclipse here in our area of New York. Some people took the day off, some people traveled to where the path of this eclipse was going, and so they could see a fuller, clear eclipse. People prepared by getting special glasses so that they could look at the eclipse without being blinded. The eclipse is the moon cuts a path in front of the sun, blocking it out from our view. And there's kind of a ring of sunlight around the moon in most cases. And so there was this childhood excitement about this event. Many people acted like kids on a field trip. But there were other people who were just simply annoyed by the whole thing. There were people who kept doing their business as if nothing was happening. In some cities, people acted very annoyed that there were people clogging up the sidewalks, looking up at the sky. Their attitude seemed to be, I'm really, really important, and you're in my way. That posture of annoyance was particularly ironic in light of the perspective of that day. If you reverse the perspective and you look down at the earth from the edge of the cosmos, things look a lot different. From that angle, the annoyed, hustling and bustling, highly important people angling their way through the obstacle course of onlookers would be completely insignificant. Our sun and moon and 8 planets are just one little neighborhood among an estimated 200 billion neighborhoods that make up the universe. If we think of the Milky Way galaxy as being the size of the entire continent of North America, our solar system would fit into a coffee cup. That's how small, even just the Milky Way, which is incredibly vast, how small it would be in comparison to the whole universe. 2 Voyager spacecrafts are cruising toward the edge of the solar system now at a rate of more than 35,000 miles per hour. They've been doing that for more than 40 years and have traveled more than 11 billion miles with no end in sight. When NASA sends communication to one of those Voyagers traveling at that velocity, it takes about 17 hours for that communication to get there. That data has led scientists to estimate that to send a speed of light message to the edge of the universe would take more than 15 billion years to arrive. From that perspective, we are incredibly small and insignificant, aren't we? You and I see the world with our own 2 eyes, from the minuscule perspective of where we live. We tend to convince ourselves that we, or at least should be, we are in control. We get to direct our own lives. We get to script our future. We come back again to the truth that Philip Yancey reminded us of earlier. Prayer is the act of seeing reality from God's point of view. God is the one who calls us to be still and know that I am God. Psalm 8 marvels at this very wonder. Psalm 8, 3 and 4, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind, that you are mindful of them? Human beings, that you care for them. All of our scientific discoveries in the thousands of years since the simple prayer was written have only confirmed its wisdom. In the vast expanse, who is this God who would concern himself with the likes of me? The great scandal and most important work of prayer is simply to let ourselves be loved by God. There's a good kind of small, and it comes with wonder at a God who is so big that he is enough to fashion the cosmos with his breath, and he's personal enough to take a real interest in the events of my day and the fluctuations of my emotions. One of the disadvantages of cities and any populated place is that our artificial lighting at night drowns out our ability to clearly see the stars. Even going from Unadilla to my mom's house out in the country, I can see the sky so much more clearly there without the lights of the town. Isn't there a profound symbolism in the fact that our artificial lights drowned out the heavenly lights? But even when we can't see the stars clearly because of our lights, they are still there. But our man-made lights vie for our attention. We don't like to be alone in dark, open spaces that remind us of just how small we are. It becomes easy to believe the illusion that the world, from my tiny perspective, is all that there is. We are in danger of missing what David says, our lives against the backdrop of something so much bigger. What started with Adam and Eve never really stopped. The same ancient conspiracy repeats itself over and over again. The Tower of Babel, King Saul, the Pharisaic priesthood, the CEO of your company, and in me as well. We're all prone to drown out our view of God, to keep moving, to go about our lives as though we are at the center. Stillness in the quiet space where God migrates from the periphery back to the center, and prayer pours forth from the life that God has at the center. So we want to know God, be still and know that he is God. We also need to know ourselves. In Psalm 146, smack in the middle of a bunch of poetry praising the greatness of God, the psalmist drops these record-scratching lines. Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man, in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day, his plans perish. First glance, these words seem woefully out of place, like a line from a eulogy that was accidentally added to a praise anthem. But seen from the right perspective, this is prayer. Western culture is increasingly a haven for the young who look endlessly into the future of adventure and discovery stretching out in front of them. We celebrate the first half of life, toned bodies, stylized wardrobes, vocational upward mobility, and exciting weekend plans. The elderly are a forgotten breed. When you visit a cemetery, you see stones with people's names on them. And every one of those stones represents someone who was living fast, who was making plans, who was dodging every obstacle in their way of their preferred future. In other words, someone with a will who did their best to bring that will to bear on the present moment. But now they're a memory in a world with people living even faster with more plans. This reminds us that everything that gets us stressed up, that stresses us out, every conflict that replays in the back of our mind, every anxiety that churns in our gut, every preoccupation we have about what's going to happen tomorrow morning, all of that noise will one day cease. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that day, his plans perish. Those tombstones are an important reminder of how temporary you and I are. Psalm 39, another of David's prayers, reads, "Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me see how fleeting my life is. You made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Everyone is but a breath, even those who seem secure." When David prays, he's undermining that most ancient conspiracy, the lie that was whispered just before Adam and Eve plucked that forbidden fruit was this: "You will not certainly die," Satan told them. And that lie wrecked and still wreaks havoc on the human soul and social order. And so a prayer like, "Let me know, God, how fleeting my life is not self-deprecating or depressive. It's a self-aware victory. To turn our fast lives into stillness and our busy minds into solitude is an act of rebellion against the curse that runs through our veins. When we live in constant noise, we forget our mortality, and the consequences are of the farthest reaching variety. Live like this world, and this world, that's all you got. You're going to lose yourself trying to be everything for everybody. Pretending you won't die is a miserable, dehumanizing lie, the original lie. We never tire of believing it, and we never fail to lose ourselves in it. On the contrary, when by stillness we remember our mortality, we recover who we are. Solitude is the furnace of transformation, Henry Nouwen says. Without solitude, we remain victims of our society and continue to be entangled in the illusions of the false self. Solitude is the place of the great struggle and the great encounter, the struggle against the compulsions of the false self, and the encounter with the loving God who offers himself as the substance of the new self. David was pleading with God to remind him that he is temporary. Not because he was depressed, but because it would show him his true value. In Psalm 8, 4-5, he says, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor." When I pray, when I see myself as I really am from God's perspective, I behold not only my own smallness, but also how valuable I truly am to God. David goes on to pray things like, "God keeps count of my anxious tossings while trying to sleep. He bottles up every tear that I've ever shed. God's good thoughts toward me outnumber the grains of sand on the world's beaches." Psalm 56:8 and Psalm 139:17-18. Where does someone get the moxie to pray like that? David is free enough to admit that he's not in control. He's not all-powerful. He's not enough. But he doesn't have to be. He's not wallowing in his lack. He's celebrating it. When you see how great God is and how fragile and fleeting you are, you equally see how profoundly you matter to God. The Creator has time for you. He wants us to talk with Him. You and I are like clay jars. We're dust. But God has hidden redemption in us. God has hidden away a kind of life that never stops in us. Only when you see who you really are can you also see how profoundly you matter. Be still and know that I am God. Slow down. Remember who God really is. Remember who you really are. That's prayer. Number 3, unhurried love. Jesus was intentional about his own practice of stillness. He began his ministry with 40 days of wilderness solitude. He retreated into stillness before he chose his 12 disciples from his growing crowd of followers. He did the same after he healed a leper and after he sent out his followers to minister in surrounding villages. Frequently, Jesus would slip away from the crowd late at night or early in the morning. He would retreat to the company of his Father. He would retreat from the noise of both praise and criticism alike. He would escape the clamor of the crowd, even when it seemed like he was being incredibly successful, and his disciples would be like, "Why aren't you continuing this?" And he would instead listen and get away to listen to the still small whisper of the Spirit. Jesus was intentional, and yet he was equally interruptible. Sure, he slipped away from the crowds, but he also allowed himself to be interrupted mid-mission, to heal Bartimaeus on the outskirts of Jericho, to heal a hemorrhaging woman who touched him from a crowd, and even to appreciate the faith of a Syrophoenician woman. Jesus was intentional and interruptible. There's a word for that posture, the word unhurried. Hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life. Why? Because hurry kills love. Hurry hides behind anger and agitation and self-centeredness. It blinds our eyes to the truth that we are God's beloved, and she is a sister and he is a brother as well. Throughout church history, certain sects, monks and monasteries have devoted their entire lives to stillness. In monastic traditions, there was both solitude and community. Monks would devote themselves to times of solitude and silence and prayer, but they would also take time to pray together. They would also be available to one another. The idea of being intentional about connecting with God and yet at the same time being interruptible out of love for another person when they have a need for help or conversation or prayer. We want to be both intentional and interruptible, which means we would be unhurried. Stillness before God transforms us into unhurried love. It is in the stillness of silent prayer that God turns over the soil of our hearts, revealing our desires to us and the source of their fullest satisfaction. When we stop moving and stop talking, we arrive present and quiet before God. He takes all of our disordered desires, distorted attachments, and codependencies and transforms them into love. When we use others to meet our needs, we can't love them. Codependent people don't truly love each other. They're just using each other. Each needs the other person to feel okay. When we need the world and we need something from the world, and we need something from the fearfully and wonderfully made people who populate the world to make us feel whole ourselves, then we can't truly love those people. God has to break our attachments to the world so that we can truly love the world. And by that I mean the people in this world. God has to break our attachments to the people who feed our egos so we can truly see others, know others, welcome others, and love others. The place where this work happens is in silent prayer. In this way, stillness is profoundly missional. Stillness starts in isolation, but it ends in being with everybody. Almost everyone who recites Psalm 46 stops with, "Be still and know that I am God." But that's not where the sons of Korah stopped. Be still. Let go of your anxiety. Lay down your burden. Take rest for your soul. And then proceed to the rest of Psalm 46:10. They say, God says, "I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." That's the destination of this prayer, the promise that we become aware of in holy stillness. Exalted in the earth means God's presence becomes a reality that is plainly visible. We see his presence more and more. It means that love breaks out everywhere there is hate. Kindness floods competition and sweeps it away. Peace swallows up fear. Joy washes over jealousy. Self-control calms rage. Here's the way God promises to get all of that done. Be still and know that I am God. Be still. Remember who God is. Remember who you are. And then do your best to live without getting that order mixed up. That'll be enough. That's where you start changing. And as a result, the world around you can start changing as well. Picture yourself on a beach. A brisk November day, the cold wind cuts through your clothes, waves melodically crash as the water pulls in and out with the tide. The sun hangs low in the late afternoon. The water stretches hundreds of miles beyond what looks like the edge. Do you see anything that's more powerful than you? That's great. Start there. In conclusion, the practice, be still. Many confuse stillness with waiting for revelation. And sometimes revelation may come. And if it does, it's marvelous. But that's not the purpose of stillness. The purpose is consent. It is a daily practice of consenting to the work of God's Spirit, which is deeper than understanding or words. It's how deep calls to deep from our souls to His. Pick a consistent time. For you, this might be the final moments before rushing off for your morning commute. It might be the sudden silence right after dropping off the kids at school, or it might be the daily office lunch break. It could be the very first thing you do in the morning or the very last thing you do before your head hits the pillow. The when doesn't matter so long as the when is consistent, because there's no such thing as a habit or priority that doesn't happen consistently. Create a ritual. Choose an ordinary place to become sacred, ordinary, holy ground. This could be your favorite chair, the back porch steps, or a special spot outside. Sit up straight with 2 feet planted firmly on the ground. Lay your hands in your lap, palms open, facing up as a way of physically symbolizing your desire to be open to the Lord. Close your eyes. Breathe in deeply. Exhale slowly 3 times. Pray something simple and invitational. Traditionally, this is called a breath prayer, and it sounds like, "Here I am, Lord," or "Come, Holy Spirit," or "Lord, have mercy." And then be quiet, be still, wait. I suggest setting a timer. A chime on your device or an old-fashioned stopwatch will do. When you set a timer, it keeps you from needing to open your eyes to check the time. Start with 2 minutes. Do that every day. Just 2 minutes of silence. And after a month, bump it up to 4, and then a month later to 6. And keep going until you reach at least 10 minutes. Resist the urge to decide if this practice of silent prayer is working. Don't evaluate if you're getting anything out of it. Simply trust that the practice of a couple centuries worth of saints and the practice of Jesus himself might have a place in your life too. Practice silence as a sacrificial offering to God. It's that simple. It's about giving something of yourself to God, not getting something from God. One day you'll look up discovering that somewhere along the way, at a point you can't precisely name, but you know for sure that you've crossed, silent prayer has become a lifeline. It's become an essential in your life. Give God the first word and let spoken prayer follow as a response.